Good morning. Hello and welcome to ACJ News. Today we'll be discussing about euthanasia and the debate of living will. We have Lavanya and Narayan with us. Thank you, Lavanya, for joining us.
Thank you.
So, the last week Supreme Court announced in its decision that living will now be a parameter to euthanize. What do you think about it?
If we're talking about the greater kind of, topic of euthanasia, I personally am pro, just because I think everybody's right to life and their will to live is more in their own hands than even in the hands of like family or friends, just because only you know what you've gone through. So I'm definitely pro, but can you expand like what the Supreme Court decision is?
Sure. So living will is an advanced healthcare directive that will be revoked when the person is alive. So once a person is suffering from a terminal illness and has gone into a permanent vegetative state and kind of adheres to the conditions which are required for a person to be euthanized, a living will be revoked then for the person, and then the doctors can carry out euthanasia. So it is that parameter which will allow a patient to be euthanized.
Okay,
so do you think that a requirement like that, a living will, is required? Like, because if a person suddenly slips into an irreversible coma or goes into a permanent vegetative state, then we don't have procedures like this. Then the entire the court follows the procedures, the court gets to decide.
Sure.
So what do you think?
So I actually think, as far as I know, having a background in the States, I know that there are some states in America that follow this directive and follow this procedure.
Right.
And I'm not sure if my home state does, but as far as I know, it's something I've always found really interesting and a really smart decision, because I think when you're talking about coma or a state of vegetation or, a terminal illness, you're talking about a situation which doesn't really have, in most cases, a positive sort of outlook. So to kind of have this living will in place, I kind of like to compare it to a prenup in a marriage. It's not that this is going to happen per se, but to have a procedure in place to say that, okay, if this has happened, these are the steps we're going to take, I think is really important. So I think it's definitely a step forward. It's a good thing to give physicians the authority to do that. The one caveat I'd say with this is that the physician needs to be exercising, obviously, his own code of ethics or her own code of ethics, needs to be morally grounded, needs to make sure that that's where the question that comes in is the physician a good physician, right? Because they shouldn't misuse that, and that's when you get into really gray area. So maybe I would say the one caveat to giving physicians this ability to have this living will directive is then to kind of have an additional background check in place for those physicians who want to do it before they are allowed to instate that procedure, just to make sure that, okay, this is a safe thing that's being done and this is in the best interest of the patient, and the patient's health.
But as much as we say that this euthanasia is required for patients who are suffering from terminal illness, there's also another set of doctors who kind of claim that passive euthanasia is more or less like palliative medicine. So, because palliative medicine is actually the medicine which is given towards the end of life to reduce the pain, to relieve the pain.
Sure.
So they kind of already feel that passive euthanasia is palliative medicine. So even though India legalized passive euthanasia way back in 2011 following Aruna Chanbog case, we still don't have doctors who actually carry out euthanasia because they're scared of the law, they're scared of the consequences. Many doctors also, don't carry out euthanasia because they have their own vested interests.
Exactly.
So what do you think about that?
So I think that's one is accountability for sure, and that's something you see in all sectors in India, be it healthcare, be it anything else, where you talk about the fear. Well, a lot of that is, in this country you don't have medical malpractice. That's not really a spoken about concept, whereas in the States, there is the ability that if you feel that the doctor is misusing, then you can file a medical malpractice lawsuit. So in a way, you're protected on both sides. I think as long as you don't have that procedure, what happens is health is a very personal thing. So to make it, without that legal kind of precedent in place, it's in a very personal territory where the doctor is going to feel scared to do anything about that. So I think the biggest thing there is, if you ask me about this healthcare system, one is digitalization of the system and creating an accountability kind of protocol in place, I think is very, very important. I've noticed it when I go to the doctors. There's not really a great tracking system, and I think another issue here is that it's still not, how do you say this? A lot of times the patient is not treated as the decision maker. A lot of times the minute the patient is sick, because of the way India is as a culture, the patient's family speaks on behalf of them,
Right.
or and it's not even a thing of like in the States. You have to get a document signed, or even for your husband or your wife to speak for you. Whereas
Right.
here, like I remember I was in the hospital with dengue, and my whole extended family spoke for me, and I didn't even know I had dengue for a good 48 hours.
Right.
So I think the first step, whether it's that or especially in the case of palliative care and euthanasia, is give respect to the patient,
and
give
his or her family. Because
Exactly.
what happened in Aruna Shanbog's case was that a journalist and a social activist, Pinky Virani, was the one who filed a petition
I
for
see.
her, and that is how passive euthanasia debate came into being in India.
Sure.
And then, even though the court accepted and approved of her petition, she was not allowed to be passive euthanized, because the court did not accept or recognize Pinky as her family or the next in her clan. So,
Yeah.
the court decided to recognize the KEM hospital staff who were taking care, and so
As the guardians.
and so euthanasia was not carried out.
That's
and
another-
following
yeah.
that, I'm sorry to cut
No,
you.
no, sorry.
Following that, there has been a directive which only allows the court to decide, and nobody else gets to decide.
Yeah,
Not even the family, spouse, or any next friend. Only court would decide. Obviously, it kind of also puts forward that we would give weightage to what the person thinks, what the family thinks, but the ultimate decision is in our hands. So don't you think that it actually kind of contradicts what euthanasia is all about? Euthanasia is about dignity. It's about dignified death, and
Sure.
it also contradicts Article 21, which is right to life and right to death.
Completely, and I think that's where your term of accountability and being able to sign off on a document saying, in the case that I am not medically capable to make XYZ decisions,
Right.
this person is responsible for my health, which is something I know in the States we have. I'm not sure how much of it is practiced in Trump today, but so far in healthcare, there has been that delineation of this is the person who's going to sign off on, my health procedures. So I think that's something that's definitely necessary. One, like you said, for the dignity, and just because I think anyone would agree that when you're sick, you know best how
What
you
you
feel
want.
and what you want. And in the case that you don't, you have that one person or two people who you say, okay, they know me better than I know myself. That could be your parents, your sibling, your friend. So it should really be in your hands at the end of the day, regardless of what age and stage you are, because I think if you've lived for so long, you've proven the fact that you have the ability to make that decision. So I completely agree. Yeah.
So here we are towards the end of our discussion. As much as we agree that death is unpleasant and the thought of it is intimidating, I guess both of us agree that a right like this and a legalization like this would help us face death a little easier than before. So, but keeping in mind the cases like Harold Shipman and others where euthanasia was misused, let's just hope the doctors follow the code of ethics. Thank you.